Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to our podcast today. Coming with you a little bit of a different schedule for this week's action. We're going to drop a big podcast today on the Monday, and we'll do our subscriber pod tomorrow on Tuesday, and that'll be us for the week. Got some other stuff happening, but we will keep showing up and serving up the Aotearoa sporting yarns. Today we're going to be doing a bit of football for Ferns chat. That happened on Thursday, but a Warriors chat as well, and of course NBL finals happened as well. So those are the three main topics we'll be chatting today. We'll touch on other things in the subscriber podcast tomorrow, other things such as maybe some cricket, maybe some what else? Flying Kiwis, bit of Flying Kiwis action as well, and whatever else we want to chat about. We do encourage our subscribers via Patreon and Substack to ask questions and chime in on our subscriber podcast. And shout out to Stacey from the Island Bay Yacht Club signing up to the paid Substack subscription. Big up the Patreon whānau, big up everyone with a paid Substack subscription. That subscriber podcast will be available for you tomorrow. Otherwise, we've got a whole lot of Aotearoa sporting yarn coming at you via the free Substack newsletter. That will come out later today, as well as another one on Friday, so you can read about some various sporting matters via the free Substack subscription. And there is the opportunity to sign up to a paid Substack subscription. Obviously got the Patreon whānau as well. And we do have Nick of the Wildcard delivered 2 Football Ferns recap debrief yarns from the win over Norway. That's live on our website right now, denise-case.com. I did a Warriors versus Raiders debrief as well, and there'll be another busy week writing about Aotearoa sport on our website, denise-case.com. So big up yourself. Hope you're enjoying these amazing Aotearoa sporting times. And before we get into the big old kōrero, let's get a bit of mindfulness.
Yeah, let's do that. And this comes from old mate Marcel Proust, who says, desire makes everything blossom, possession makes everything wither and fade.
Yeah, you don't want to cling to it. You don't want to be desperate for it. You don't want to, but you do need to follow you got to balance out the desires. You don't want to be driven too much by desire, but you do want to follow the desires of your soul.
Yeah, I guess you don't want to possess your desires in a way that makes ties that mindfulness up in a little bit of a pretzel knot, but still, like, desire is a motivating factor, I suppose. If you want something, you're inclined to then go and try and achieve it, right? Whereas possession is already having something, and your inclination is less about going out and doing something productive and more about, like, how can I defend this thing that I already have, which gets into some murky territory, like morally speaking, when you start acting in that kind of way, because that's also not being adaptable to change and evolution and stuff. That's just being like, I've got the thing, now I only ever want to have this thing and nothing else needs to change. That's like a stick in the mud kind of mentality when you get into that kind of state.
I was in a bit of a state on Thursday night watching the football Ferns, one of the most epic Aotearoa sporting performances and moments I can remember of my lifetime, and that's all I can speak for. But I do have a bit of a niggly point, because you're the football expert. I'm not the football expert, and to be honest, I did predict that the football Ferns would win on our Thursday podcast, just more tongue-in-cheek, more taking the piss, and I was wrong. Because the football Ferns didn't hold on. They didn't like absorb 90 minutes of pressure and score a lucky goal and then just park the bus and grind out a gritty win. Football Ferns dominated Norway in every aspect of a game of football. And you said Norway were good. I beg to differ. Norway sucked. You did, fair play to you. You did highlight some defensive fragility in Norway, but you were quick to highlight, a couple world class players, going to be a tough match against really good opponents. And I just thought Norway sucked. Football Ferns were far superior, and that was the surprising thing, just how dominant they were. And part of the last like 5 minutes, the last 10 minutes, part of the pain and suffering of watching that was the fear that you instilled in me about Norway. So I was like, surely Norway can't suck. Like, surely this isn't going to happen to Norway, because I've heard Norway's really good. And so those last few minutes were terrifying, based on that fear of knowing how good Norway were. But once again, the Football Ferns dominated, and that was the most surprising, the most fascinating thing about that game.
Yeah, well, for what it's worth, I felt a lot of the same fear and terror in the latter stages of that game as well. But it was a bit more like, I don't know, it was a little bit different because by that point I had come around to kind of what you were saying, where it's like Norway have just played so poorly in this game that the Football Ferns should win. It's not like I'm sitting there like I remember the one 4 years ago, first game of the World Cup. They're up against the Netherlands. It's 0-0, and they end up losing. I think it's like Jill Roord or someone like that scores with, I think in stoppage time. In fact, I think it was like a stoppage time winner that beat the Ferns. That felt like just clinging on. That felt like that stereotype of the New Zealand football team going, trying to punch above their weight and not quite being able to do so. It was like a solid, encouraging performance with no happy result at the end of it, kind of thing. Like, you still lost. You went close against a really good team, but you still lost. It felt like maybe that was going to get to the stage against Norway where it was like, I think that last 20 minutes, because there was also that game against Australia a couple of years or last year where they were again, like Anna Green scores a stunning goal from the sideline, crazy dipping volley, and then they basically have no other chances in the entire game. And Australia have about 1,000 of them, but they're still 1-0 up going into stoppage time, and then they concede twice in stoppage time and lose 2-1. Like, there's been examples of this happening where the Ferns have played well, not quite hold on. The difference there is that those two games was just backs to the wall for 94 minutes. As you say, against Norway, worst case reading of that game is that it was even. And that was a lot more than it shouldn't have been. A lot more than anyone expected. Arguably, it was a lot less than even, because while the position stats were around about 50-50, the shots were around about even. I would argue that the Football Ferns had better moments to score, plus the fact that they actually did score one, I think counts quite significantly in their favor as well. And they weren't set up to be a position dominant team. So they were good when they had the ball, but they're also good when Norway had the ball. Like, it felt when Norway had the ball, the Football Ferns were in control. So the dominant factor is relative to how they set up to play. But yeah, as far as the tactics went, as far as like the game plan goes, it works pretty much exactly how the Football Ferns best devised it, and the opposite of whatever Norway was trying, because you could see the way they were playing was disjointed, because their plan A wasn't happening. They weren't being able to progress the ball through the midfield. They were getting stuck at the back. They were getting stretched because they were finding themselves without a midfield to use. They were having to like pump it long or early switches out to the wingers. The wingers were getting dominated because our fullbacks were winning every tackle, and the long balls were just forcing the front three, particularly Ada Hedgeberg, the striker, to hang right on the last defender, like Rebecca Stott or Katie Bowen or whoever. Usually Rebecca Stott, I think. But then Stotty was just like stepping up and winning the headers. So it didn't matter there. But then because Hannah Wilkinson was able to, in a quite a surprising way, like hit those channels and running in behind and stuff, not just holding the ball up, which she did very well too, but running in behind, and they didn't always work. Like, there were a couple of times she got in the penalty area and a heavy touch got away, cost a shot kind of thing. But the fact is, she was stretching the Norway defense, and Jackie Hand was running at them too, and Indy Riley was running at them too, and like their defensive line was real deep, their attacking line was real high. The midfield was stretched over everything in between, and our midfield was winning all the ball in there. They were a bit of a shambles. Like for a team that is like, yeah, they're supposed to be good. They're supposed to be good because they got great players. They're not supposed to be good because like they made the World Cup final last time, or anything like that. Actually, last year in the Euros, they lost 8-0 to England in the group stage. It was like quite an embarrassing moment for them, one of their worst ever results. It seems like maybe they haven't quite figured out the problems that they had that day, because they lost to the Football Ferns here, and that was a blisteringly good English team that went on to win those Euros. But Football Ferns also bossed them in this match. So yeah, maybe Norway not such contenders. So basically, like I did another thing I'll claim some credit for is in my preview I did tout I didn't want to go all in, because you don't want to count out a team like Norway who have so many good attacking players, but
Don't be scared.
yeah, well, I did hint in there that maybe Switzerland might actually be the best team in this group. So I now think maybe New Zealand might be the best team in this group if they can play like that against Switzerland as well. Although I don't think Switzerland are going to be as brittle as we got from Norway. Like I think Norway's issue as well was also a psychological one, where it's like the tactics didn't work, but then because they didn't work, they lost a lot of confidence and lost a lot of direction in how they were trying to play. So it was like like when I say it was like a best case scenario for the Football Ferns, best case scenario for some teams is winning like 8-0, England against Norway last time. Best case scenario for the Football Ferns against a team that's on the fringes of the top 10 probably is like a 1-0 win. That's more or less how they play. They still aren't a good attacking team, but they had the definitive attacking moment of that game, and they bloody won. What do you know? They beat a team like Norway that was no one was predicting that coming in, but they turned up. They played better. They played a more defined, successful kind of game plan. They were, at the risk of sounding like one of them scrappy old ex-Premier League type guys yelling at the TV screen, they wanted it more. They put in more of a shift. They were winning the 50-50 balls. Just I often feel like when people say that as well, it's like it's less about one team doesn't care aspect, and it's more about one team has like hesitation in their head because of usually like tactical roles and stuff like that. It's like I shouldn't be here in this spot. Someone else is meant to be here, so I don't jump into the tackle as willingly as someone else who's just like, I don't care. I'm going to win the ball because this is how we're playing, kind of thing. It was as good as we could have expected from the Football Ferns, and it's probably the best I've ever seen them play. It was wild.
Yeah, like sometimes it is who wants it more, and you see that on a rugby league field in the NRL quite a lot. But it's also if you come in with a plan and you quickly realize that your plan isn't working and there isn't necessarily a defined plan B, that's going to mess with your effort and intensity, because you're also not because you're like, oh, screw this. You're just like,
I don't know what to do. Yeah,
so much mental energy. You're trying to figure it out and trying to piece other areas, and then you're wondering why like this isn't happening or that's not happening. And but I think again, I think it's far more than just effort. It's football, like. And this is one of your big takeaways from that first game was it just looked like there was a clear training camp with all the players, and the staff had time to work with the players to implement a strategy, to implement a plan. And like you've been big on this the whole time, the Football Ferns haven't had their strongest squad, let alone how international football fixtures are managed, where it's like players are coming from all around the world for a couple of days to prepare for an international fixture. It's hard to win when you don't even have your best players, let alone the players you do have playing with cohesion and chemistry. And that was on display in pure footballing elements, where the passing patterns, like the passing pattern for the goal was a thing of beauty, right down. And I am noticing these details, like the game against Vietnam, there was a free kick where I can't remember who the players were, but the players over the ball, they were pretending like they don't know what's happening. and then they do a free kick
Yeah,
into
that's right.
space. Similar thing for the goal where Vic Essen, the goalie, she's meant to be taking the goal kick. I'm like, is this like under 10s where the goalie can't even boot the ball? And I was like, I've seen Vic Essen do goal kicks. Like, she can kick the ball, she can hoof it downfield basically. But then Katie Bowen's taking the goal kick. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, this isn't what
But
we
if you
want.
notice it, Vic Essen places the ball. Like she places the ball, steps back, and then Katie Bowen just runs in randomly and takes it. But it's obviously not random,
Yeah,
is
well,
it?
that's
It's
the
like
thing.
it's
Like, it's a
clearly
plan.
something they've worked on.
Yeah, it's a plan. So I'm like, but you're expecting the goal kick, and because this is such a big football thing where you're like, yeah, the crappy teams, their goalkeeper cannot do goal kicks. Like, we've all
Yeah.
seen it. You need like your big burly centre back to take the goal kick. And I'm like, this isn't what I want. I don't want to see this. I don't want to see the fullback taking the goal kick. But it was Katie Bowen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she,
Inch perfect pass as
yeah,
well.
intentionally whipped it over to the sideline, bang, 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 goal. And that is just one example of like the passing patterns they were operating with, because when Hannah Wilkinson was getting into lots of space, it was 2 or 3 passes that got her into space. And it's like all across the field, little triangles, little combinations, but then without the ball, it was the same thing. Hannah, like everything was just the detail and the planning and the preparation and the strategy. Like Hannah Wilkinson, anytime the goalie put the ball down, Hannah Wilkinson was on it, putting pressure on. The strikers were narrow and forcing the ball to go where they wanted the ball to go. And that just flowed through. And as you said, the midfielders stepping in front of passes, winning tackles. Like, you're not chopping inside CJ Bott. You're not chopping inside Ali Riley, let alone Katie Bowen stepping in front and going on a little stroll downfield to pick out a good pass. Like, all the footballing things, it was effort. It was a great atmosphere, the environment. You could see the Ferns were buzzing. They were playing with that energy. But that energy and the mana of the occasion didn't override the football. It actually enhanced the football with and without the football. All the details, all the skill execution, the planning, and just doing what the football Ferns wanted to do and how they wanted to boss that game. They did it perfectly, and it could have very easily been a 1-1 draw. Like if Norway take one of their chances, right? Could have been 3-0 as well. Could have been 4-0. Could have been 5-0. Like the Ferns had a
Well,
couple.
we did miss a penalty.
It did
You know.
miss a penalty, so at least 2-0. Steinmetz had a shot out from outside the box. Ali Riley had a shot outside the box. And as the
Indy Riley one that was tipped over the bar. Yeah.
exactly, that's another one. And Hannah Wilkinson had the possession entering the box a few times, especially before half time. And that's when I was like, they better get a goal here because they're dominating, but they haven't scored. And then come into the second half, they score straight away. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I do want to just move it along to get your preview thoughts for the next game. And I don't know what else you can add to that little yarn.
Well, I mean, they often say like the proverbial they often say that it's a great time to score just before halftime because you make the coach rip up their notes and whatever, where that they were preparing for the halftime team talk kind of thing, like the kind of stereotypical one of those just football aphorism
Well,
things.
that's like NRL. The shit teams,
Across all sports, people
but it's
say
not.
that.
I don't think it's a coach thing. It's more of it's just the sport thing. Like the bad NRL teams, they concede tries before and after halftime, and who knows what that means spiritually or vibey. But like maybe the old football adage is you interrupt the coach's plan. But I think in a holistic sporting sense, it's more airy-fairy, and we don't know how to define it, but it does matter. And the football Ferns created chances before halftime, and they scored a goal straight after halftime.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you make there, is that cliche gets caught up in cause and effect, and people focus on the effect of how it's going to change the game moving forward. The real thing is that the cause is that, as you say, bad teams will concede just before halftime because they're tired, or just after halftime because the other team has adjusted better than they did. And that's what I was worried about at halftime. It's like, that was a really good first half, but maybe they should have scored a goal when they were on top. because I don't know if they can sustain this. And then, Norway came straight out and whipped the ball into the box from a decent position, and there was a header that was flicked wide. That led to the goal kick that the Ferns scored from. So Norway was straight on the attack. I'm thinking, okay, well, there's the thing. And then the Ferns score one of the best goals I've ever seen them score. Just brilliant team move coming from a set play as well, where there's improvisation involved, but there's also like patterns that they've designed to put them into those positions. Like, it's just perfectly orchestrated, and then all the execution was great. The cross from Jackie Hand could not have been better. Hannah Wilkinson just being in the right place, finishing it beautifully, like awesome. It seems like that's a better time to score than just before halftime, though. Just before halftime, coach has got to rip up their notes. So what? They'll come up with some more notes. Just after halftime, coach has already made their ideas, like told the team, had 15 minutes of telling them exactly how they're going to change this game. And then it gets a whole lot worse all of a sudden. It's like, well, now you've wrecked things for them, and they don't really have time to adjust. They did a little bit. They chucked on an extra midfielder and tried to change some of the balance of their team a little bit. We'll note that the first player subbed off was their left winger. So I can't remember her name, but Julie Blackstad, I think it was. And she was subbed off 10 minutes into the first half. She'd been playing on the side with Indy Riley and CJ Bott. CJ Bott had basically set the tone from the very start. The game went away from her a little bit after that, but that's because she was dominating that side. They just knew not to go there. But Indy Riley dropping back and winning a bunch of tackles as well. Like, between those two, they won 16 challenges, which is a massive number. It's a huge number. CJ Bott proved herself last year as one of the best tacklers in the WSL. So that's not a surprise. Indy Riley chipping in as well. A bit more of a surprise. The way they just wrecked that side was not a surprise so much as it's like, that's the best case scenario we could hope for, is that everything would work to their favor, which it did. Should we have a minute or two on Malia Steinmetz while we're here? Because I think we were both extremely impressed.
My notes here, do want to do some preview thoughts. Got Malia Steinmetz and the introduction of Claudia Bunge, which I found interesting. But Malia Steinmetz, so there's a lot of great players. Rhea Percival, Ali Riley, the centre backs, they're amazing. Hannah Wilkinson, obviously. We'll say Hannah Wilkinson, she's from the W League. So is Rebecca Stott. No,
Stott was. She left for Brighton. But all those players you mentioned have played above the W League and in the W League, except for Ali Riley. He obviously hasn't. Percival hasn't either, but
because Malia Steinmetz, she's not and this is the thing, everyone's judging these like teams on like, oh, this player plays for Barcelona, oh, this player plays for Chelsea, these are the best players in the world playing for the best clubs, and I get that as a marketing strategy, but you don't need to be playing for those leagues, you don't need to be playing for those clubs, because Malia Steinmetz, she plays for Western Sydney Wanderers, right, in the Aussie League, and she dominated all those players. Whether it was her...
Including players from Chelsea and Barcelona in that
exactly. Midfield. To me, that falls in the same idea of like the US women's national team saving the world. Like, yeah, cool, you play for Barcelona, but are you going to win? Like, that's all that matters at the World Cup. And you can see it in the men's World Cups as well, because there's a whole lot of players who don't play for those leagues that perform better than the players in those leagues. Excuse me, I just had a bit of a rant there. But Malia Steinmetz, she won as much possession as Rhea Percival. She had the same shot that Rhea Percival had. She was...
better passing accuracy.
And like, she is more of an unknown in that team. So how, as someone who's followed the football Ferns closely, like how surprised were you at the role Malia Steinmetz has given? Also Kiwi Samoan, which is fantastic. And how surprised were you at her performance?
Well, it's the best I've ever seen her play, so there's that. I don't know if I would say surprise is the right word, because it's the same thing as I was saying about CJ Bott. It's like all the elements you know about this person's game were the things. Like, it wasn't like she did anything different than I've seen from her before. Steinmetz, when I watched her at the Under-20 World Cup, when she, I can't remember, it was a couple waves ago, but whenever that was, I remember thinking her and Grace Jale were the standout players. They were both playing in midfield, and Steinmetz just won everything. Like every loose ball, you have a heavy touch in the midfield, she's swooping through and taking it off you. Like that was clear when she was a teenager playing at the Under 20 World Cup, right? It hasn't been as clear in the A League because I don't think she's always been given the best role just to do that. Even the first year she played with Perth, and then that was decent, but they weren't very good, which didn't help. Like they lost almost every game that year. She moves to Western Sydney, and first year didn't get a lot of minutes. Like she just wasn't really a starting 11 player for them. She should have been. I don't know why she wasn't. Then Tom Samani comes in to be like the head of women's football at that club, and she resigns, which I was a little bit surprised about at first. But then it's like, well, new direction in the club, new manager as well, a lot of new players. Well, it's basically a new team, so you might as well just resign. Why not? Much better season last year, although often asked to be someone who pushes up a little bit more, not like the CDM that we see her doing for the Ferns. Did actually play in central defense once or twice in that season, though, just as a fill-in when others were unavailable. So she hasn't quite had this breakout at the A-League level, but it's also like that's why she's, the one of the dark horse type players at this tournament, is because she hasn't really been able to show that at club level, hasn't played at a particularly high level. Well, she hasn't played above the A League yet, but she's someone who has had the potential for a long time, right? So to see the way that she played alongside Rhea Percival, who frankly has a very similar skill set. Percival is a little bit more technical in the way she takes set pieces and stuff like this, but both of them are like, they're not precise passes, but they are like big work rate, great tacklers, extremely just like combative kind of midfielders. And which is why, you sort of wonder if they're going to play two in the middle, which I don't think they will against Philippines, just quietly. I think they'll go back to that 4-3-3 that they had against Vietnam. I think that's a bit like variation depending on the opponents. If you're going to play two through the middle, you almost sort of think like the temptation is you pick a Betsy Hassett or a Annalie Longo or maybe even Liv Chance dropping in there kind of thing, so that you have that passer in between them. They didn't do that, but then also they didn't need that. It was like, if there was a surprise about it, it was the fact that Steinmetz's passing was so good. That's maybe the weakness of her thing, is she wins the ball but doesn't necessarily distribute it. But here it was like fine. It's nothing. It wasn't flawless. It wasn't like she was passing at 90% or anything. Mid-60s, I think, but like that was also the best of any midfielder, better than any of the Norway midfielders, and it was better than Percival, who I think, to be fair, Percival was like whipping long balls and stuff and crosses as well. So that's why that dips. But it was just like, she wins the ball, she looks up, a teammate is exactly where she expects a teammate to be. Benefits of the training camp again, I think, just everyone knew their roles and everyone knew what everyone else's role is. So she wins the ball, looks up, teammate don't have to think about it. Teammate's just there, pass it to them. I think there was like absolutely brilliant from Steinmetz, who I think was probably the player who played the most above what we've seen their sort of average level, even for the Ferns, where she's been quite good when she's got an opportunity, which was mostly while Percival was out injured. They've only played a couple times together. There's a third game they started together. Haven't conceded a goal in any of those 3 games, so that seems like something worth persisting with down the line.
You mentioned the formation there. You might have some details like where, because I thought the two midfielders were Steinmetz and Percival, but it felt like Betsy Hassett was just going everywhere. So I don't know if it was are you kind of saying they played a 4-4-2? Because it still felt to me like it was some it always depends, like when they've got the ball, when they don't have the ball. But it did feel to me like it was Steinmetz and Percival just holding down the middle, and then Betsy Hassett was going everywhere. And I do want to shout out Betsy Hassett, because a lot of her forward passing was slick. And like we've mentioned Steinmetz and Percival, their playmaking to go with the defensive mahi, but just having Betsy Hassett free to pop up wherever the ball goes, if I'm reading that correctly, it frees her up to do what she does best, which is passing the ball and get into attacking spaces.
Yeah, and Hassett was really good at just collecting the ball like through contact. You know what I mean? Like she's picking up the ball with someone marking her and just like body between player and ball, shield it off, turn, go, sort of thing. Like really good at that. Like tight spaces, she was as she has been for a long time. This is one of the best aspects of her of her game. Like that was on full display there. I think if you I mean, I didn't really check this bit, but I suspect if you look at some of the like heat mappy type stat things and touch maps and things like that, you probably find that Norway's left defender was a bit higher than their right fullback. I don't think Betsy Hassett had to drop back and defend as much as Indy Riley did on the other side, is what I mean. So I think that allowed her to have a bit more space to work in because she drops in away from the defender and then it's like no one's tracking you because Carolyn Gran Hansen up front was very much that's what I was saying at the start. Like their front three was playing a very high line. So Hassett was free to drop in and collect the ball in those exact same spaces and probably free to like drift infield a little bit more sometimes as well and try be, a little bit of an extra support to the midfield. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I wrote this in the thing, like you could throw a dart at the team sheet and whichever player you hit, you could make a case for why they were the player of the day. Everyone played very well. Hassett was one of the more underrated ones, but definitely like the, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Every role there was essential, and Hassett was certainly part of that plan. And, it's a little bit different than what she had in the previous game, where she was very much a part of a three-player midfield, which I think we'll probably see them go back to against Philippines as well.
I think it's more offense and defense. Defense, they play 4-4-2.
Yeah.
So Hassett's on the left and Paige Riley, India Paige Riley. I always get the it's Roger Tuivasa.
The commentator was doing it on the thing too, kept calling her Paige Riley as if that was
India
her
Paige,
name. Yeah.
then Riley.
But then you also have Ali Riley, so
yeah,
you got to specify your Rileys.
We need to get a India Paige Riley IPR. Shout out IPR. Big man Ting on the right side of the field. She was defending on the right midfielder, Betsy Hassett defending on the left midfielder. But I do think when they got the ball, then it might have morphed more into your 4-3-3 system with Hassett promoted. Because
definitely.
IPR, she was flying up the right flank, but Hand was going everywhere as well. It did seem fluid, which I also like, not just holding down certain areas on the field. Quick word about Claudia Bunge, because when the subs did roll in the second half, I was a bit iffy. Like, combine that with the fear instilled in us about Norway and the greatest players in the world. It's like, whoa, we're subbing off the centre back. Like, it seemed like everything was working well. And I understand, like, you said Paige Satchel was one of the fastest players, if not the fastest player in the Football Ferns squad. So she gets injected. That's great. I think Gabby Rennie was injected, a bit of energy, pizzazz, whatever. More just to do the defensive mahi of chasing everyone around late in the game. But Claudia Bunge came on at centre-back for Rebecca Stott. And the good thing that I noticed, because there was that fear in such a key position, was nothing changed. She came on and just played a solid centre-back role. Obviously, Katie Bowen's fantastic. And she really started to step up literally and figuratively in the last kind of 20 minutes. But Claudia Bunge came on, and as we've said, rolling the subs. Is this a 3-person sub situation? It's not the 5.
I think it is 5, but you only get 3 windows to use them in. So you have to make, if you want to use your 5, you got to make a couple double subs, and they just, didn't. I looked this up across some of the other games. It's only been like 3 teams in the first few days who actually used all 5 of their subs, and it was like America and Canada and, teams that have the depth, most teams are just happy to roll with their players that they start with.
It's the All Blacks thing where if we all rotate our bench at 60 minutes, well, we've got the better bench, so we're going to win. And I think as women's football, you can see that you want your best players on the park as often as possible, especially for a team like New Zealand. So you can see how you got to tighten up your rotation. But just the injection of Claudia Bunge, I thought was fantastic because there was no change in the performance. And I find that really interesting about her abilities, but also even if you've got Rebecca Stott and Katie Bowen holding it down for most of the tournament, you can absorb an injury or suspension or something like that because Claudia Bunch just stepped in, no harm or foul.
Yeah, and I suspect, unlike the other two subs, which, as you rightly say, are very much about, and also we're very late. Like I don't think Paige Satchel came on till about the 85th minute, and Gabby Rennie might have even been stoppage time. They're very much about energy off the ball, like just keeping the just refreshing the legs, basically, just giving the Ferns that extra boost to try to get over the finish line, knowing that they'd already scored the goal they needed. You know, they weren't there to try to be clinical finishers to add a second. They were there to defend what they had. And I suspect against Philippines, you're likely to see very different subs because I think that's where you're more when you're expecting to be able to like dominate the game a bit more in terms of position and attacks. Like that's where you might see in that same situation. For example, if they're 1-0 up against Philippines with 5 minutes to go, it might be more likely Grace Jale or even Millie Clegg or someone like that who comes on instead of someone like Satchel or Rennie. Like that was very much for the situation. I think the Claudia Bunge one though was maybe pre-planned. Like I think that's just a reflection of Rebecca Stott maybe not having 90 minutes in her leg at that level of intensity because she didn't play a heap for Brighton over the last season. Missed a lot of time with an ankle injury. Obviously, the year before that, dealing with the old cancer diagnosis. So that is going to knock you around a bit in terms of fitness. I heard her on a podcast talking about this, saying like it's only quite recently that she's felt like her fitness has got up to where it was beforehand. It was like more than a year after getting the all clears. You know, that just takes some time. So I think that was probably in reflection of that, but also in reflection of the fact that Claudia Bunge is good enough to be starting in this Football Ferns team. They've just they've gone with Stott and Bowen as the centre backs, but Bunge could easily sub in for Bowen and you wouldn't lose anything. Or in this case, she comes on for the last 20 minutes in place of Stott and you didn't lose anything. Like she's a very good player who I fully expect will. There's actually a few of these players I wouldn't be surprised if they pop up at bigger professional deals on the back of this World Cup. But I think Claudia Bunge has won after 3 very strong seasons with the Melbourne Victory. She's someone who probably was on that trajectory, even if there were no World Cup, she'd probably be getting something like that. So I am going to be keeping a close eye on if there's any like rumors or whatever with Claudia Bunge, because I do think she's someone to be very well aware of. But now I also think Spalia Steinmetz might be in the same bag, and Jackie Hand and Indy Riley might also be in the same bag too all of a sudden. But yeah, Bunge was already there regardless of the World Cup.
Let's just drop some preview thoughts. They're playing the Philippines on Tuesday, so that's why we're recording today, so we could get in between these games. Philippines lost to Switzerland. You hinted that Switzerland might be the best team in the pool, which will be interesting setting up that final game. Are you obviously I think the Football Ferns are going to win all these games based on that performance against Norway. How has this game impacted your confidence heading into the Philippines? Because there was a bit of buzz about Philippines, good coach, plucky underdog, could upset a few teams. They got defeated by Switzerland, and now they're coming up against the real plucky underdog. Now they're coming up against the real team who's here to upset the big dogs. So how are you viewing this Philippines game going down Tuesday night in Wellington, I believe?
Yeah, I mean, this was the game I thought they would win anyway. I thought they were going to win this game coming into the World Cup when I didn't think they could get anything off Norway and wasn't sure how they'd go against Switzerland. Now that they've got a win against Norway, I still think they're going to beat Philippines, but I can't say that's different. It's the same thing I already expected. I think most people expected this to be the game that broke the World Cup drought. Never having won a game at a World Cup kind of thing before. Well, now they've already broken that with a game to spare. Like, why wait, right? Just get out ahead of time. And what that means is that if they do the frankly expected thing at this point and beat Philippines, which is not going to be easy, they are a tricky, plucky kind of team. They gave them a lot of worries when they played them, admittedly in a 2-1 victory, but it was a trickier game than maybe they expected when they played the Philippines about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that, 14, 15 months. That wasn't a full strength Football Ferns team. and they've had that training camp and the win against Norway, and they're at home. So there's a lot of things that put the Ferns in a better situation now compared to where Philippines might have improved since then. So I expect them to win. Not taking anything for granted, but if they do win, I mean, they're on 6 points at that point. Like after 2 rounds, they would be on 6 points. It's hard not to make the knockouts with 6 points. Like the only way that can happen is if three teams end up on 6 points, because then you get like everyone beating. They would require everyone to beat the Philippines. Norway would beat the Philippines. Switzerland already beat the Philippines. We beat the Philippines, and then if we beat Norway, lose to Switzerland, and Switzerland beat Norway, like rock paper scissors kind of formation. Rock beats scissors, but loses to paper, but paper loses to scissors kind of thing. Um, if that happens, everyone would be on 6 points, and we'd be talking about goal difference. Don't know if goal difference is going to be amazing for the football Ferns. Like, they're not a team that scores a lot of goals, right? So that's not something they can necessarily hang their hat on. However, Switzerland, I think I didn't get to watch that game, but I have seen the highlights, and it felt from that and looking at the stats and reading a little bit about it, felt like 2-0 was a flattering result to the Philippines more so than to Switzerland. We have seen that actually a lot through these games. Like the smaller teams have been quite successful at just sitting in deep, defending, and frustrating bigger teams who haven't quite been able to break them down. I think maybe that's just a little bit of like first game of the World Cup. Everyone's a little bit rusty. Been a couple months since the European season in particular ended. I think that's probably more the case of why players keep missing penalties and underperforming against their XG marks and all this kind of stuff. And I so yeah, I think Philippines maybe could have lost by more to Switzerland, but that's a benefit to the Ferns, isn't it? Because it means Switzerland didn't put them to the sword like they might have. So if they beat the Philippines, they're very good chance to go through the knockout rounds, which is incredible. Like that's double the achievement of having won their first ever game. Like take the Norway win and then double it. That's what making the knockouts would mean. And they might go through in first place based on the way that this went as well, because they took points off the favorite team in the thing. Yeah, well, I mean, that's just how the group's shaping up now. All of a sudden, they're in control of things, which is beautiful and unexpected. But they have to beat the Philippines to hammer that home. So, they're lucky in that they've played the Philippines once, relatively recently. They're also lucky in that they scheduled that pre-tournament game against Vietnam, who are a similar level team to the Philippines. They're a similar style to the Philippines. They come from a very similar part of the world to the Philippines, which is why those things are true. It's basically that was a dress rehearsal for this game, and they won that game relatively comfortably. They barely looked like conceding against Vietnam, and they were able to get a couple goals along the way. So I'm confident about this one. It's a weird place to be going into a World Cup game. I've never had this feeling before,
The Warriors are winning, and a lot of people haven't had that feeling either. So
No, well,
these
after a
are
while.
really interesting Aotearoa Sporting Times. Obviously, the Warriors had a golden point win over the Raiders, 21-20. And the first thing I'm thinking about that win was that the New South Wales Cup team also had a drop goal to win their game against the Raiders, and the Raiders presented two different but really interesting challenges for both Warriors team, because the New South Wales Cup team right now is extremely young. There's at least 3 SG ball players playing every week, which is under 19. There are 3 under 19 players in the team that played the Raiders this week, but a lot of the other dudes are like in their first season of full reserve grade as well. And like Michael Seo might be bumping 30 as a veteran. Kailani Going's only in his mid-20s as one of the leaders as well. And then you kind of view Ben Farr, who is an Aussie who came from Wynnum. Yeah, he's the real solid Aussie battler who's just there to lead the boys. Well, he's 22 years old. And that's the story of the New South Wales Cup Warriors, which does take away from winning against these really good reserve grade teams like the Raiders, who have far more experience in the reserve grade. And funnily enough, like the Raiders had Matt Frawley play the first half, then he didn't play the second half because he went into the 18th man duties for the NRL team. That's how the Warriors came back. They scored second half tries. The Raiders didn't score second half points, and that tells you about the Raiders is they were winning because of their reserve grade experience, and those players also have NRL experience, and they were just an older reserve grade team. Whereas the Warriors were far younger, but they got the job done with a golden point. Not a golden point, I think it was just a droppy from Ronald Volkman. And funnily enough, Ronald Volkman, he scores, his kicking game is really interesting because he always chips it about knee height through the line. Something to watch out for when he does play NRL. And he scored a try, it might have been the second game against the Bulldogs, kicking the ball into a defender, gets the ball back, scores. He did the same thing against the Raiders in New South Wales Cup, and he's probably doing the same thing every third week because he just kicks it. He kind of chips it into the space, and then the other team, they always want to kick at the ball. He gets it back, he scored, and then he kicked the winning field goal. For the Warriors in the NRL, the Raiders are just such a funky team, and you saw Matthew Tomoko just bursting down the right side of the field. And if it's not him, it's Jordan Rapana. We saw Jordan Rapana do some freaky things. And then if you're struggling to tackle them, it's Joseph Tapine. If you're struggling to tackle him, then it's Josh Papali'i. And then suddenly Jack Whiten gets the ball, and he's a fantastic. All those Raiders players, Elliot Whitehead, Hudson Young, Sebastian Chris, the Aotearoa Kiwis fullback, Raiders fullback, but Aotearoa Kiwis player. All those players can pass, all those players can offload, and all those players can bust tackles. And it's just a really tricky challenge when you combine that with typical Raiders toughness and just grit. And that's really hard to handle. That's why the Raiders are consistently a good team. I don't think they're a top-notch defensive team like the Warriors, but they do present a very tricky challenge to defeat in the NRL. That's why they came back, because they can shift the footy. They can create points. They can trouble you everywhere and move you around. All their comeback tries were examples of that. I think Rapana put in a grubber. He's a winger, but he was playing infield slightly. He put in a grubber for Whitehead to score. Rapana scored off a kick. Fantastic catch. And then the try that Whiten scored, they shift the footy to the sideline, make a break. They're following up. That is Raiders footy, but the Warriors dealt with it. They battled on. So both Warriors teams faced not unique, but specific challenges against their Raiders counterparts, and they had 1-point victories, which is really solid, especially for the NRL team, because they're not going to be able to execute their shape as they have done against the Eels and the Sharks recently, and obviously the Dragons and those kind of victories. You're not going to be able to do that against every NRL team because they're going to have their plans and their schemes, and they might just be playing better than you. And that's what happened against the Raiders, but the Warriors got the dub, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that game was a weird one because it did feel like it was a good competitive game because the Raiders are in good form. It's easy to forget that if you've just been watching the Warriors games, where the Warriors have now beaten them twice in the space of a couple months, but the Raiders have won every other game in between. They've lost twice to the Warriors, and then I think I was looking at this before. I think the last 9 games they've played, which also includes 2 byes in that span. Is it 9 or 7? I think it's 7. They've won 5 out of 7 with 2 byes as well. So the last 9 weeks. And their 2 other games have been defeats to the Warriors. I would say the Warriors have their number, but also it didn't look like that in the last 10 minutes at Mount Smart on over the weekend, where the Raiders were storming back, and then they had that sort of the try in the last seconds to keep things alive with the shift out to the left, and you're like, well, this is the only way they're going to score, and then they actually do score that way. It wasn't looking great for the Warriors at that moment, and then the golden point stuff was absolutely flawless. It helped that the Raiders kicked deep and gave them a 7 tackle set, but there's also there's composure on the was it Chancellor Clockstad? I can't remember. I think it was him who took the catch. Sets that one up nicely, gets them the thing, and then it's just 10-meter run, 10-meter run, 10-meter run, 10-meter run at a quick tempo as well, to where they just storm up the field, and then the last tackle's on like the 20-meter line, I think, where it's like, well, you've got perfect situation now to just throw. You've got Sean Johnson's got like 10, 15 meters now of space where you can just hoof it back to him. He's going to get a kickoff. Perfect field goal. Like, he couldn't have hit it any better. It's just the way they did that golden point set was perfect. And it was so perfect. Well, I mean, there's no degrees of perfect. You're either perfect or not perfect, right? But it was perfect to the point where it's like, the fact that they blew the lead to get to that point suddenly doesn't matter so much, because if you can execute like that in golden point, you're a tough team to beat.
Yeah, and it's, again, like, whenever the Warriors get to golden point, you're always hoping they just storm down the middle, execute the field goal, but it's never quite that simple. And that's basically, I think you can tell how well coached the team is and how they execute those few details, because it's not hard. Like, yeah, you do need to be aware that you don't want to have a play the ball on the try line, and then, because then you lose the 10-meter defensive advantage as well. So it's like, you need to you need to have your last few play the balls in the middle. You need to have an option to go early. You probably need to have two kickers ready. If one kicker's ready, you need to have two kickers ready. So whenever you want to do that, you probably want to have two kickers ready. And you don't want to go beyond the 10-meter line, because then you lose your advantage. And it's just, if you execute all those little details, it's quite simple. Like, then it's just up to your kicker. And most of these dudes should be able to kick a field goal in the NRL. If they don't, it's usually because some of those details were missed. Like, even if your play the ball was on the wrong side of the field, like on the wrong, like, you think NFL, how they
the hash mark kind of thing, where they try to light it up for a right-footed kicker versus a left-footed kicker.
Like, all those details matter, and if you miss the field goal, it's probably because you haven't paid attention to those details. But the well-coached teams, they tick all those boxes and it looks seamless, and that's what the Warriors are up to right now. I do have some ideas that I can kind of tie into, like, the Warriors might not have been as fatigued as the Raiders, and thus they were able to think clearly and process everything. One of those is Sean Nickel-Klokstad's running stats, but he does so much running, but he was the bloke who thought calmly and composedly, if that's a word, to catch that kick in the end goal. So the bloke who's doing the most mahi then made a clear decision. So my whole fatigue idea, I don't know if it applies, because the dude who should be under the most fatigue made the clear decision, right? But Nickel-Klokstad, and I'm running the stat in the email newsletter, he is second for total runs in the NRL behind Dylan Edwards, and he is basically Dylan Edwards and Nickel-Klokstad, then Jareem Buller. He averages 20 runs per game. Nickel-Klokstad averages 20.9, and Dylan Edwards averages 21.6. Buller has played far fewer games. He's got 100 fewer runs than Nickel-Klokstad, and let alone Edwards. And Nickel-Klokstad, when you think, like, who's doing the most mahi for the Warriors, it is Nickel-Klokstad. Because some of those sets, it might have been that final set, he's taken 2 runs. And that's what he does every single week, and it's amazing. So then for him to have that clarity of thinking, to execute a winning play, to get that 7 tackle set, that's amazing from him at fullback. But again, I was talking about it in the preview, the similarities between him and Dylan Edwards. Because right now, like, they are the only dudes who have over 300 runs, averaging over 20 runs per game. And they also play the same way. Dylan Edwards usually pops up on the right side for the Panthers. Nickel-Klokstad usually pops up on the right side for the Warriors. They're taking two runs in the first 4 tackles, basically, is what they do. So when they're in their own end, they're taking 2 runs, let alone kick returns. And that's Nickel-Klokstad. And I was like, just his ability he's safe under the high ball. He is a willing runner. Even if he doesn't average 10 meters per run and he gets driven back on one run, he's going to take another run 2 seconds later, and it might be better. Just while we're here, Marcelo Montoya is third for total runs, but he averages 16.6, and Adam Fanua-Blake is sixth for total runs. He averages 16.2. So it is rarefied air for Nickel Clockstar and Edwards to be averaging, like Nickel Clockstar's 20.94 runs per game. So he's rounded up, he's 21 runs per game. So him and Edwards are the only blokes in that realm, which is elite NRL stuff. Part of that is also, I thought the bench makeup was interesting because Tom Ale got dropped to New South Wales Cup. He was fantastic in New South Wales Cup. 57 minutes, 15 runs for 164 meters, 10.9 meters per run. He's played 40 plus minutes in just 2 games, and he hadn't played 30 plus minutes in his last 6 games. Then he goes down to New South Wales Cup, gets 57 minutes. That's why he's playing New South Wales Cup, to get that workload up. But I also thought him going back to New South Wales Cup gave the Warriors a bench of more back rowers, more like Bailey Sirinen and Josh Curran are on the bench together with Dylan Walker and Bunty Afoa. So you've got more mobile forwards who can cover position, but you're thinking you're playing the Raiders, what are you doing most of the game? Especially when you've only got 40-odd% possession. You're chasing the footy. So Bailey Sirinen, Dylan Walker, and Josh Curran are useful in that role. And I think that was like a little stylistic change for the Warriors. And you can kind of sense it, because if the Warriors have Fanua-Blake, Bunty Afoa, and Tom Ale, it skews towards powerful runners. But in this game, they only had Afoa and Fanua-Blake. So then it's Sirinen and Curran. So it skews towards a bit of versatility, but also just mobility, because Sirinen and Curran, they can both be starting edge forwards, which just means they're a bit more mobile, a bit quicker. But then Bunty Afoa only played 13 minutes and came on, let me pull it up to be specific. He came on in the 56th minute. So he's been starting, and in this game, usually Bunty Afoa starts and he might not come back on the field. He's just 20 minutes, then he gets replaced for Dylan Walker, and it's a very important role because he's just the battering ram, makes his tackles, and then Dylan Walker comes on and the whole game changes. So both of them are playing very important roles. In this game, he's on the bench and he only comes on in the 56th minute. So he's not fatigued. He's fresh. And there was a lot of rotations in those last 20 minutes. I think maybe the rotations actually helped the Raiders get back into the game because there are a lot of different players on the field. But I also thought the Warriors were able to ride out the wave of momentum from the Raiders just with a few tweaks to their forward pack and having a bit more energy, especially late in the game, because again, the winning play, the winning moments were all clear thinking and clear strategy and stuff like that, which you're not going to do if you're conceding 54% possession and you're also making 100 more tackles. But you need some fresh legs to help counteract that and balance that out.
Yeah, which kind of sounds similar to some of that football phone stuff from earlier on as well, where it's like, oh, how were they able to hold on this time for a win when in the past they've not been able to hold on in similar situations? It's like, well, you know, go into this, even like the smaller detail of using substitutes that add to your mobility at the end of there, but it's also like they didn't get battered for 90 minutes in this case. They didn't get better the whole time. They were even in possession, so they were no more tired than the Norwegian team would have been tired, and therefore they're making clearer decisions at the end. They're they're not lapsing in positioning and things like that. They've still got the spring in their legs to win those headers and whatever, like all those little things. And also, I think point I didn't make earlier, but I will make now because I probably should have, is like how well coached the football Ferns looked in that game, just like specifically shouting out Yuka Kimplova, who has had probably an unwarranted amount of pressure on her because of the results in the past, where I've tried to mention which is Pep Guardiola 2.0, but she certainly wasn't the reason the Ferns were losing. It was a lot more to do with player availability and the teams they were playing, stuff like that. And the Warriors are the same, where it's just like, Webster hasn't had to battle through pressure or anything because he's been really good from day one. But that is another example of how the Warriors are just a really, really well-coached team at the moment. And I don't know, man. I'm starting to think that that's actually quite an important thing in the NRL, particularly because I've been supporting a team for several years who haven't been well coached. Probably not for about a decade if they've been well coached.
I'm sure you're enjoying Anthony Griffin Hook on the Fox Sports commentary. Like, he just pops up with. He did a game. He was part of a 3-man commentary booth, and he's obviously not working the sideline. Like, praise God, that doesn't happen. But he just pops up and he's got. Doesn't exactly have a voice for commentary, and he does, but he chimes in with some good tactics and plans and stuff. It's like, shout out to you. You've got another job. Just quickly, the NBL finals did happen over the weekend, and Canterbury Rams are the champions. Shout out to them. They defeated the Tuatara in the final. Just to break this down, I'm going to give my favorite thing from the final or the final series, then I'll throw it over to you. My favorite thing was the minutes and the game time of these youngsters in the NBL final. Cruz Pero Hunt and Charlie Dalton were both instrumental for the Tuatara. They played over 20 minutes, and Charlie Dalton, even Pero Hunt, was on the court late in that game as it was highly competitive. And then you go to the Canterbury Rams, second for minutes, Walter Brown. He was fantastic, and I like Max Darling quite a lot as well. He was really good. But Walter Brown was on the court late in the game. So was Charlie Dalton, Cruz Pero Hunt, 21 minutes. A lot of strong contributions from really young players, and that shows the strength of Aotearoa basketball. Obviously, to win an NBL championship, you need really good older players and imports and stuff like that, which the Canterbury Rams did have. Shout out Ty Wynyard, because he was fantastic earlier in the season. But for me, my favorite thing from the final was the contributions of the young players and how valuable they were to each of their teams, especially in high pressure moments. What about yourself?
Yeah, well, just like adding to what you're saying there about the young guys, is the other aspect of that is like, Charlie Dalton is an Aucklander from that roughly around that same region too. Like Cruz Pero Hunt, I'm pretty sure he's an Auckland lad as well. He's been away at college and has just come back. Let alone guys like, Rob Lowe and Ruben Tarangi and whoever else. I mean, Tarangi, for example, has played all around the country, but I'm pretty sure he's not only an Auckland player, I'm pretty sure he's a South Auckland lad as well. So there you go. Like it's not just the locals that are delivering for these guys. It's also locals who connect with the region in some way. And you know what? Exactly the same for Canterbury, which has clearly a much smaller population. Therefore, you'd imagine a much smaller like sort of catchment area for players. But like Walter Brown's a Cantabrian, Taylor Britt's a Cantabrian, Max Darling's from that region as well, Tom Webley as well. Tom Webley didn't get much to do in the final because they left their imports out there for long times. But I think Quinn Clinton might be as well. I'm not 100% sure on him. Corey Webster isn't. Corey Webster is the one New Zealander in the game who is playing for a different region to where he's, grew up. Otherwise, he'd be on the other team. But my favorite thing from that final would have to be Corey Webster. Like, he was the difference for me because you expect the imports to be pretty good. I mean, if you want to get technical, you'd say that the Tuatara picked the worst game imaginable for their 3-point shooting to disappear. But also, I think a lot of that was the perimeter defensive, in particular, to be honest, like guys like Troy Baxter Jr. and Tevin Brown, the imports for Canterbury. But Corey Webster, like, who hadn't looked that flash for Canterbury, if we're being honest, through the regular season games that he played. I think just getting his rhythm going, probably more than anything, but excellent in his final series. And 25 points, 4 of 6 shooting from deep, plus 4 rebounds and 6 assists. Like, he was fantastic. Some of that, like, he's making buckets in the most important time as well. He was also at times carrying them at points where it looked like the Tortada were the team that might have been on the verge. They never did pull away, but it might have been on the verge of pulling away had they not been able to, timely buckets coming back the other way. But just, man, you can't, you got to do like Corey Webster in your team. You cannot be discounted. And I'll tell you, I think he was the difference in the Canterbury Rams getting up there. And it was their first NBL title for 30 odd years, I think 31 years, something like that they said. It's a season for them that started brilliantly. And then Tywin Yard did leave, and there were probably a couple stumbles in there. And that one of the reasons they tried to fix that was bringing in Corey Webster. Didn't work initially, but come the final, like, big game player, just everything you would want from a starting Tall Blacks dude. And also in that context, he goes from this into the Tall Blacks camp now, like, ready to roll ahead of the World Cup coming up next month. Like, that's also a rather exciting aspect of how this final went down and how this final series ended up. But shout out to the Canterbury Rams, because not only did they win it with a really impressive performance in the final, they were at times one of the best, like, they were one of the best teams throughout, but they started the season as arguably the best team. And that local core as well. It's all just Cantabrian dudes, plus Corey Webster. You got to be impressed by that as well.
Corey Webster, his only 20-plus point games were Otago Nuggets in the semi-final, and Auckland Tuatara in the final. And his best three-point shooting performances were also those two finals games, 4 three-pointers in each finals game. So his best basketball was played in the finals, 25 points in the final, season high. Boom. That's how you want to play your basketball. That's how you win a finals championship. Big up yourself. We'll have our subscriber pod coming out tomorrow for the Patreon and paid Substack subscribers, and then we'll take a break for the rest of the week, but we'll swing back around early next week. Otherwise, check in with the newsletter, check in with the website, thenews-case.com. Love yourself. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Churcher.